Aesthetics and sexual selection, cultural consumption, and the cultivated reader in the egoist, huh? What about that, huh? You know, a lot of people are into these Kardashian asses. I don't see any, natural selection advantage to these ginormous asses. So, for example, in her article, Natural Selection and Narrative from the Egoist, Carolyn Williams writes, Darwinism works as the touchstone of the novel's dramatic irony when it is falsely understood by the central character, the male egoist, Willow whatever, okay. As such, the anxiety is one already inherent in Darwin's own accounts of sexual selection. Darwin's position on sexual selection in humans is notoriously slippery. He seems at times to argue that woman in civilization are no longer has the pejorative of choice. Okay, he argues that civilized woman has more freedom than her savage counterpart, and yet again he claims the savage woman has more freedom to choose her mate than is at first apparent. Okay, Wolf's essay collections, yada yada yada, as she writes in The Temptations of Aggrandized Agency, Feminist Histories, and Horizon of Modernity, the impulse to imagine a form of agency fueled by the insights of critical detachment reveals the unexamined limit in the general theories of power to which these critics otherwise subscribe, yada yada yada, Amanda argues, rhetorical, blah blah blah. This is actually an awful article. I would highly recommend people read, The Cosmic Race by Jose Vasconcelos. But I'm going to get back to this. I do have to make an honest attempt at reading this. This kind of dictomy is perhaps most famously articulated by I'm not even going to do it. Let me move on here. The point is that aesthetics are a primary driving force in natural selection. People that don't believe me should go to the gym, or go to the club, or go anywhere and look at how they look for a mate. Okay? Aesthetics has a big appeal. I would also recommend people read The Satanic Witch by Anton Sandor Lavey, where he goes into this, and also the Satanic Bible, where he goes into this. There's also a new book called The Satanic Warlock that was written by some dude. It's now, according to the Church of Satan, it's canon according to the Church of Satan. But Anton Lavey does talk about aesthetics quite a bit in modern Satanism, and the use of aesthetics in what he terms lesser magic, which is manipulation. But aesthetics and aesthetic appeal is a very big part at choosing one's mate. Aesthetics holds great appeal. So prior to genetics being the end-all, be-all as that it has become, anthropologists and other peoples that studied human ethnicity used languages, okay? That studied human culture, human language, and the migration of human language. This is where we get the term Indo-European and Indo-Iranian and Indo-Aryan, okay? This is because all of these languages, the Sanskrit language, the Slavic languages, the Germanic languages, the Celtic languages, the Romance languages of France, of Rome, of Spain, etc., even English, all come from, and English is actually a Germanic language that borrows heavily from Romance languages, but English is a Germanic language. Of course, people know the Anglo-Saxons. The Anglo-Saxons and Jutes were a Germanic people. But my point is that prior to genetics, people used language. Well, how does that pan out? Well, actually pretty good. So, let's see here. Since Darwin's On the Origin of Species, linguists and geneticists have implicitly or explicitly connected languages with genetics. A recent paper by Matsume provides a new method for assessing whether different lines, of course it's not always going to correlate exactly, because obviously there's some Arabic-speaking people in West Africa and things like that, but it's because language can be learned, but more or less you'll see. So there's a way for assessing whether different lines of evidence consistently tell similar stories about the past. So do languages and genetics tell a similar story about migrations of people? Well, genetic, linguistic, and music data from 14 Northeast Asian populations. This work is important because while it may seem easy to discover whether the histories told by languages and genes are similar, it's not. Discerning exactly how human populations evolve. So human populations evolve. Evolution is a change in genes. Okay? So you have to understand that. So that is a genetic change. So they're admitting human populations evolve, groups of people evolve, meaning they diverge genetically. What theoretical frameworks make sense? How do we work across disciplines? What methods provide robust answers? Matsume addresses these issues, providing an elegant way to compare what different sources tell us. To uncover the origins and relationships of human groups around the globe, geneticists use genetic markers, Y chromosome, mitochondrial DNA, or autosomal DNA, and linguists use linguistic markers, lexical cognates, grammatical features. An important question then is whether inferences drawn from these different markers are consistent or not. Are they all telling us the same thing, or do they tell us different things about different aspects of human prehistory? Consistently matters because the interpretation of these markers often recruits evidence across disciplines. For example, geneticists often interpret their results in terms of cultural or linguistic groupings and vice versa. However, if languages and genes do not share the same evolutionary history, then interpreting their histories together is problematic. Okay, why should languages and genes tell us the same story about prehistory? There is only shared history that has generated all the genetic and linguistic variation around the globe. Okay, we might expect that the processes and events that cause human populations to split and diverge during prehistory would simultaneously affect those populations' genes and languages. For example, if a group of people moved to settle in a new region, forming a new community. Okay, so remember, what causes a race to evolve out of another race? Geographic separation, okay, geographic separation, natural selection, and sexual selection. Okay, so if they formed a new community, we might expect them to stop talking with and stop intermixing with groups in their homeland. That's not necessarily true, though, even if only due to the tyranny of distance. Therefore, over time, their languages and genes would then accumulate unique differences from their original population. Furthermore, languages can act as barriers, keeping people from mixing, okay? So a language barrier can stop you from mating, obviously, because you can't communicate with the person. Blocking contact and interaction between people. So if you block contact and you block interaction, you'll block sexual contact, which means you block reproduction. These barriers would then essentially shoehorn the genetic variation into the boundaries of the linguistic history. However, there are also good reasons to be skeptical of strong matches between language and genes, okay? Because people like Genghis Khan went around and, a person's genetic makeup is inherited at birth from their... See, this is the thing, though. So, yes, a person's genetic makeup is inherited at birth from their parents. But people often speak multiple languages at the same time and can change their language over their lifespan. However, people must understand the movement of people, as freely as it has become, is a new advent with, essentially it hasn't existed like it has in modern times ever before, but it was only really in the Roman Empire where you saw mass movements of people and mass intermixing of people. Okay, so a person's genetic makeup is inherited at birth, whereas the languages are learned. Communities, blah, blah, blah. Languages also tend to evolve far more rapidly. If you read the book, The Selfish Gene, I actually did a video about this, about how Richard Dawkins' real contribution to science was actually in social science, not biology, before he became a professional dickhead. But languages also tend to evolve far more rapidly than genes. Okay, so this goes with memetics versus genetics, which is a term coined by Dr. Richard Dawkins. He coined the term memetics and the word meme long before anybody on the internet thought of it. So the great Austronesian expansion that started spreading across the Pacific from Taiwan to Hawaii 5,500 years ago generated more than 1,200 very distinct languages. This is because of geographic separation. This rapid rate of change means that linguistic change happened quickly, overwrites and removes any deeper signal. Therefore, genes and languages might be evolving at radically different timescales. This is true, but it does not necessarily mean the one does not mean the other. It just means one is moving more quickly than the other. In the late 1980s, linguists and geneticists debated these issues following the publication of a series of prominent papers. The key blah 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 compared global genetic populations. Three markers suggested that the genetic and linguistic groupings overlap significantly. Yes, genetic and linguistic groupings overlap significantly. Controversy followed. One lengthy critique claimed that blah 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 conclusions were undetermined by analysis, yada yada yada. There are technical difficulties too. Many of the previous studies relied on a problematic statistical method, the Mantel test, that is notorious for having very low power, blah 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 blah. Okay, Matsumi analyzed these data using let me see if I can get to a conclusion here. What is clear is that we need more abundant data sets of cultural, linguistic, and genetic data that can be aligned in time and space. So you have to think about the total picture. Human populations are moving forward in time and space, and we need to be able to get this data and data mine it that can be aligned in time and space to provide a rich and multifaceted lens that will allow us to glimpse the full cultural evolutionary history of our species. We're going to be able to, with this thing like ChatGTP, I think that's what it's called, people are going to be able to access artificial intelligence, and it's really going to revolutionize the layman's ability to research good things well, to research well, to data mine well, to understand things quicker and more accurately. So this is an interactive map of human genetic history, okay? Now, if racial differences did not exist, you would not be able to make a map like this, okay? So, the interactive map produced by researchers from Oxford University and UCLA details the histories of genetic mixing, so genetic mixing between each of the 95 populations across Europe, Africa, Asia, and South America, spanning the last 4 millennia. Okay, the study published this week in Science simultaneously identifies dates and characteristics genetic mixing between populations. To do this, the researchers developed sophisticated statistical methods to analyze the DNA of 1,490 individuals in 95 populations. DNA really has power. This is what you need to understand. DNA has the power to tell stories and uncover details about humanity's past, said Dr. Simon Myers of Oxford University's Department of Statistics and Wellcome Trust Centre for Human Genetics, co-senior author of the study. Because our approach uses only genetic data, It provides information independent from cultural sources, from other sources, but only genetic data. So it doesn't have the muddying by languages and culture and memetics. It doesn't have the memetic muddying of the genetic information. Many of our genetic observations match historical events, and we also see evidence of previously unrecorded genetic mixing. For example, DNA of the Tu people in modern China suggests that around 1200 CE, Europeans similar to modern Greeks mixed with an otherwise Chinese-like population. Well, that might have been unknown, but it was highly speculated by certain people. With otherwise, so people like the ancient Greeks mixed with Chinese people. Plausibly, the source of this European-like DNA might be merchants traveling the Silk Road. The powerful technique christened Globetrotter. Crap, I forget the Globetrotter song. I was going to whistle it. Nah, that's not it. Provides insight into past events such as genetic legacy of the Mongol Empire. Now remember, it's very well known, or at least very well speculated, that Genghis Khan, one of my favorite historical figures, had red hair and green eyes. So it tells us the genetic legacy of the Mongol Empire. Historical records suggest that the Hazara people of Pakistan are partially descended from Mongol warriors, and this study found clear evidence of Mongol DNA entering the population during the period of the Mongol Empire. 6 other populations from the far west, from as far west as Turkey. And remember, the Turkic people, now we already knew this, the Turkic people have Mongol genes, but as far west as Turkey showed similar evidence of genetic mixing with Mongols. What amazes this person the most is simply how well our technique works, said Dr. Garrett Hellenthal of UCL Genetics Institute, lead author of the study. Although individual mutations carry only weak signals about where a person is from, by adding information across the whole genome, we can reconstruct these mixing events. Sometimes individuals sampled from nearby regions can have surprisingly different sources of mixing. Okay? Although individual mutations carry only... Okay, wait, that's just repeating it. For example, we identify distinct events happening at different times among groups sampled within Pakistan, with some inheriting DNA from sub-Saharan Africa, perhaps related to the Arab slave trade, and others from East Asia, and yet another from ancient Europe. Nearly all our populations show mixing events, so they are very common throughout recent history and often involve people migrating over large distances. The team used genome data for all 1,490 individuals to identify chunks of DNA that were shared between individuals from different populations. Populations sharing more ancestry share more chunks, and individual chunks give more clues about the underlying ancestry along chromosomes. Each population has a particular genetic palette, said Daniel Falusch of Max Planck University for Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig, Germany, co-senior author of the study. If you were to paint the genomes of people in modern-day Maya, for example, you would use a mixed palette with colors from the Spanish-like, West African, and Native American. So in Mexico, you have a mixture of genetics from Spain, from Africa, and from the indigenous American peoples. This mix dates back to 1670 CE, consistent with historical accounts describing Spanish and West African people. Okay, 670, which is consistent with the historical accounts describing Spanish and West African people entering the Americas and getting the Humpty on with the indigenous American women. Okay, though we can't directly sample DNA from the groups that mixed in the past. Okay. Understanding well the genetic similarities and differences between human populations is key for public health. And this is what you have to understand. People go medical racism, medical racism, medical racism. Yeah, you might want to know a little bit something about genetics and racial differences if you want to save people's lives. Why is that? Some populations are more at risk of certain diseases than others, and drug efficacy is also known to vary significantly. Drug efficacy is known to vary significantly. Drug efficacy is known to vary significantly. Rare genetic mutations are particularly likely to show strong differences between populations, and understanding their role in human health is an area of intense current research. And this person hopes that in the future to include even more detailed sequencing, yada, yada, yada. And I'm going to move on here. So in my next video, I'm going to continue with this video, which is about the pioneers of progressive anthropology. Now, ask yourself this question. Now, progressivism, I'm a progressive. Politically, I'm a progressive. I believe in the application of science to the formation of public policy for the benefit of the human species, particularly the human species which resides within the borders of the United States of America. Okay, but what you need to understand is there shouldn't be a such thing as progressive anthropology, just like there shouldn't be a such thing as Republican anthropology or Democrat anthropology or communist anthropology or National Socialist anthropology. There should only be anthropology, okay? When you muddy it with ideology, it is no longer a science. But I will begin my next video with this as I start to delve into the psychosis and maniacal racism of the anti-racist anthropologist FranzBoas.